All right, guys, welcome back to the Mastery Podcast for episode number 8 today, slowly approaching episode number 10. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. I know I say that a lot, but all of my guests are special, but this is a very exciting guest. Always wanted to have a really deep conversation with this gentleman here. Before I go any further into the podcast, I want you to hit that like, follow, or subscribe button so I can keep bringing you content and bringing martial arts in the world right to where you are in the world. So today, my next guest here with me live is the after school program director and master instructor at Asheville Sun Tzu in Asheville, North Carolina, run by Grandmaster Tony Morris. He's also the senior instructor with the American Judo and Jiu-Jitsu Federation, the chief instructor with the Shurute Bujutsu Kai, Kaidencho with the title of Kiyoshi from the Kodokan Ryu Jiu-Jitsu Association, a graduate of Module 2 from the Danzan Ryu Jujutsu Institute, including a bodywork certification. Began studying martial arts in 1984, studied under Professor William G. Randall, majored in physics at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. So that's definitely going to make for a great convo today. And he is a sixth dan in Danzan Ryu Jujutsu. So I'd like to introduce Professor Thabiti Sabahive. Sir, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's good to be here.
Yes, man. That's such a list. Do you think about how long that list of accolades is, like as you go through time, or is it just like a surprise to hear all that stuff?
There are times you turn around, you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
But,
when someone's reading it to you,
mostly it's just you do what you got to do, you know, and then if you're lucky, then people will appreciate what you have done. It doesn't change doing the work. You do the work because you do the work, right. And if you do it well, then some recognitions may follow.
Absolutely, 100%.
So, I've been lucky enough to have had opportunities to train with some really amazing people, and they have in various ways recognized that effort. But that's the recognition. It isn't why you do it. It's just a reminder that what you're doing is valuable to someone.
Right. Absolutely. Spoken well. I have a quote from you, sir. I'd like to read. It's from you. I'd like to read it back to you because I thought it was really dope. I thought it was really dope when I read it. And this is from you. It says, "You have a concrete and tangible way to change an aspect of how you exist in the world. By changing how your body moves, you by necessity change how your mind interacts with your body. By controlling your body, you gain access to a method which shapes your emotions and thought processes. There are no superior martial arts, only superior martial artists." Such a fire quote. I love that. So can you take us down I guess I wanted to start with that.
Well,
yeah, this is really, really amazing to hear.
Just once you've been in the arts for a while, you always get the question, well, which art is better? Right. You've heard varying levels of that question, right?
Yes, I have.
And so the thing I try to equate it to for people is like the human diet is at its core simple. You need some carbs, you need some protein, you need some fiber, you need some fat. Right. That's it. Like those are the essentials of the diet, right? We can argue about proportions of those things, and there are merits to having those things in varying proportions and quantities, but that's what it is, period. Carbs, protein, fat.
That's it.
Fiber, period. Any discussion other than that is one of flavor, right, not substance.
Right.
Right. And so whether you get your carbs from potatoes or rice or pasta or roots, irrelevant,
right,
except for where it concerns flavor, right, or what is appropriate to the geographical location you happen to be in.
Right.
So with martial arts, there are 6 things that you get to do with your body, really. You get to punch, kick, and block. You get to roll, throw, and joint lock. That's it.
That's it.
That's the list.
Very.
You know, there's really not much else, and most martial arts systems have all 6 of those elements in place to varying proportion, emphasis, and degree.
Right.
But they're there. Whether the person who practices that art chooses to engage with those things or not is entirely up to them. It's not a failing of the art. Right. That's a failing of the practitioner. Right. I had a friend. So I have some very good friends who are have like a martial arts list, sort of, you know, kind of a continuing email conversation on a lot of threads. And there was a guy on there. The tagline for his signature line for all of his emails said, "Aikido works, your Aikido doesn't. Don't confuse the two." Which I always found to be right, like, which it struck a chord with me, because you can insert any art in that spot, right? Because they all work. They all work. Just because yours doesn't work doesn't mean the art doesn't work. Right? Do not confuse your inability to make it work with a failing in the art. That's a failing of the practitioner. Because I have seen amazing practitioners of all arts do amazing things. Now, I couldn't do half of them. But
for sure.
But just because I can't do it doesn't mean it doesn't work.
Right, absolutely.
Right? I just haven't done the work to make it work.
Correct. It's just that persistence, right? And then investing that time into what you're doing.
So yeah, I like to make sure I like to make sure that I start any discussion about the arts with that understanding. This isn't about getting someone to do what I do. And I teach a lot of seminars for people who practice a variety of styles, right? And so I'm never about getting someone to do my art. This is about helping you to do your art, but better.
Correct.
Right? And so we look for the things that make us the same. And then from there, we get to understand the ways that we look at things differently.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. So
there's in that conversation, there's this idea of we have depth perception. The reason we are able to perceive things in 3 dimensions is that our eyes see from 2 different vantage points.
Correct.
Right? And so that because of that, if all you have is a single point of view, then everything becomes flat and has no depth. So you can look at, when we look at techniques or movements, from a single vantage point, it can tend to become flat, and you get people being very, very tunnel vision about what is and is not the right way of doing things. Like there are some things that are correct for the human anatomy, right? And like that's a full stop. Like the knee bends forward and back; it does not bend sideways. For example. Right. So if you are trying to do a movement that requires your knee to generate power sideways, you have a problem.
You're limited, right?
Like, there is a problem. On the other hand, but that's a human anatomy. That's a function of human anatomy. So most of the styles that any of us practice are rooted in functional human anatomy, and they have to be.
Right.
So
100%. Question for you, sir. For most of our listeners, they're not as familiar with Danzan Ryu Jujutsu, which you spent much of your life studying. So could you break down exactly what Danzan Ryu Jujutsu covers within the realm of, I guess, those 6 things we were talking about with respect to the human body? Because you seems like you pretty much, I've seen you in action before. Totally, I got a ton of questions for you, but I wanted to start there with a baseline of what Danzan Ryu Jujutsu covers, and sort of launch off from there.
Okay, so if you figure with an idea that the martial arts and human movement is kind of a mountain. And depending on the style you study, you're starting to trek to the pinnacle of that mountain. Depending on each style has a path that takes them up the mountain. And depending on where you start in your mountain, there's certain things that you get to view from one side of a mountain that you don't really get to see from another side. Right? And so out of those kind of core 6 things, most styles will focus on 2 to 4 of those 6 as their core, like starting point, like the place they start that trek. Right. And then as you progress through the ranks, as you become more advanced, you will add flavorings of the others to supplement and round out that education. So Danzan Ryu starts with rolling, throwing, and joint locking as our primary engagement. Okay. And then to that, adding the striking and kicking and blocking as your ability to throw and joint lock improves. The idea that I don't want to hit for the sake of hitting, right? If I want to have all of those things seamlessly engaged, then I need to make sure that when I hit, I'm hitting to get a result or response right out of the other person's body. Right. And so if I want to be able to lock them or throw them, then I need to hit them or kick them in ways that compromise their body.
Gotcha.
Bodies such that the throw or lock become easier.
Gotcha.
So that training process then starts with locking and throwing, and then adding the strikes to it so that the strikes feed the locks and throws that we've been spending time on doing.
Gotcha. Okay. It's pretty solid.
And we throw a lot, so we fall.
Yes.
A lot. We spend a lot of time taking falls, which it's a thing I've spent a lot of time working on. My fall changed over the course of years, because when I was younger and more resilient and not as wise, I had some time training with some people where we traded throws, and he threw me and there was this bam, and I threw him and there was this plop, plop, plop sound. Right. It's like,
yeah, ouch.
Huh, that's weird. And he threw me and bam, and I threw him, plop, plop, plop. I threw him fast, it was plop, plop, plop. I threw him hard, it was plop, plop.
Is there a technique to falling the way I've seen you do it? And again, I guess this takes us to the next aspect of things. There's this rumor. I think Grandmaster Morris had said this to me at one point about his first meeting with you, and you had come to the school, and he was trying to figure out kind of your legitimacy, I guess, as anyone would do if you kind of just walk up with your bag to someone else's school like, hey, I want to be here, and it was like kind of like, what can you do, sort of, right. And you would proceeded to do I guess a flip, and then you landed on in the driveway like just completely like a feather. And then got back up. So I guess that was like your intro, but describe that to me. Tell us if that's accurate or not, please. That's an awesome story.
So I won't say like a feather, but I've spent a lot of time learning how to disperse energy as it gets received by the body.
Right.
Right. And that process is, there are a lot of different ways to fall and to take throws, like lots. So it's actually one of the few places that after I've taught my students, when I send them out, I'm like, you do a thing. If you go to another school, do whatever they show you, but don't let them change your fall.
Gotcha.
Because the falling method that I use now is the one that has the most longevity. And I've watched people who throw for 20, 30, 40, 50 years in our style.
Right. It's a long time.
And the ones who fall softly are still throwing when they're 60, when they're 70. Right. The ones who fall hard do not. They stop throwing when they're 50.
Right.
Right. They don't have the longevity in their body, which is imperative our practice is supposed to make you stronger, it's supposed to build you up, not make you weaker.
Right.
So falls don't have to hurt. If falls are done correctly, they do not hurt.
Right.
But that's about understanding how the human structure works and setting it up to receive energy in a way that disperses, not like it doesn't all go into you in a way that is damaging. It is dispersed throughout your body. Actually, I'm out on my front porch now, so
very cool.
Do a little session here.
Very cool. I would get a demo. Nice. 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 Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Concrete it's it's a little harder than the mat.
Right.
So when you practice on the mat, you want to practice as if you're going to have to do it on concrete.
Right.
But you know, like everything else, it's an incremental process. But like that's my overall goal, is to be able to do falls on things that aren't soft and squishy, and still be okay.
Right. Gotcha. So does next
question. Yeah. No, it's a.
So I guess would size matter in any case? If you're throwing somebody, does size matter? Does as you're falling, does size matter? If you're a heavier guy.
So when I was playing around with a friend of mine some years back, both of us were relatively new black belts in our respective styles. He had been doing Chinese Kempo at the time, and you know, I was doing Danzan Ryu, and we were just doing that play around thing that guys do, and it's when it's been a while. And he at the time he weighed in at about 320.
Wow.
And so he manhandled, like he picked me up and he threw me. And so we have a technique in our style that's a countering throw. So while being thrown, you attach to them and throw them too. So he threw me, and in the process, I threw him. By the time he landed, I had him in an armbar. And then there's a part of that technique that involves having your foot on your opponent's hip. And I found out why that's important. Because even though he was 320, he could drop into the splits like at the drop of a hat. And so all of a sudden, I'm holding his arm. We're both laying on the ground. I'm holding his arm, and his leg just like comes up into the space between us. Like his head is less than arm's distance away from me.
Right.
And his leg went into the space between us and peeled me off. He said, we talked about it later. Now he was in a t-shirt at the time, and so was I, but he outweighed me more than 2-1, and throwing him in that moment was easy.
Wow.
We talked about it afterwards. He's like, well, I was just going to stand up and pick you up, which he could do. He goes, but it was a really good armbar.
So I guess what are like the principles of Danzan?
But then, like, that's why. What's that?
I said, so what are the principles, I guess, then, when you're talking about size, because martial arts seem to like really
softness.
The key thing is being able to outperform someone bigger than you in a sense, right? The smaller guy can be the bigger person. So I guess what would the core principles be that's
really a core concept for every, right? So a core principle for a core martial arts principle, period. Full stop. All martial arts, right? Is that a smaller skilled practitioner can overcome a larger, stronger opponent, right?
Correct.
So for jiu-jitsu, our primary principle that is rooted in softness and being able to yield and go with. As our founder, he said, since the fundamental principle acquired through the practice of jiu-jitsu can be elevated to a higher moral principle known as judo, or the way toughness.
Right.
It can be said that the primary purpose for the practice of jujitsu is the completion of one's character. But the idea of, if I go with your energy, we don't have an argument.
Correct.
Right. We can't argue if I agree with you.
Right.
Right. You know, hey man, you're an idiot. You're right.
Right. And then
no argument.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
But also, so that shows up in technique where the primate brain, the limbic system, engages, and when pushed, you want to push back. When pulled, you want to pull back.
Right.
Right. Like that's ingrained, hardwired. Like it doesn't even reach the higher brain functions.
Right.
So the response, that is the reaction, right? That is hardwired into the primate brain. The response that we want to train to replace that reaction, the response then is that when pulled, you enter, and when pushed, you turn.
Gotcha.
So that, you know, because if you go to push me and I turn and I look where you're pushing, now we're both facing the same direction.
Correct.
Right. And it doesn't matter if you're stronger.
Right.
If you're stronger than me is irrelevant.
Right.
You being stronger than me, actually, because I'm going to agree with you. Right. So since you're stronger, great, then we're going to go that way. If that's where you really want to go, then that's where we are going to go.
Right.
Right. And I don't know if you've ever been river rafting.
I have. Yeah. Very fun. Yeah.
So, but the fun in river rafting exists only when you go with the river.
Correct.
Right. The river is always stronger.
Correct.
Fighting the river goes.
You can exhaust yourself.
Right.
Absolutely.
But when you go with the river, you get to steer.
Gotcha.
Right. You only get to steer if you yield and with it. If you fight it, you get crushed.
Right.
So that's the core principle of jujitsu.
Gotcha.
Is in how do I find a way to go with what's being given? And if I can go with you, everything that you're trying to do to me helps me do what I want to do.
Awesome. Let's go like way back to when you started, because this is it's a long time of all this information compounded over time gives us like this, sort of, it's still like we're still formulating conclusions. I try to tell people that, like, when they ask me a question, I'm like, yeah, but that's my answer today. Ask me in 5 years from now, I'll have new information on this because I've sat on it for a little longer, Frankly, we're still studying, actively, but take us all the way back to like when you first got your start in martial arts. What was your influence? Where were you at the time in the world? What kept you going, and why Danzan Ryu Jujutsu of all the other styles, I guess, that were out there to pick from?
So I was 11. Yeah, no, I was 11. And on my 11th birthday, this kid in the neighborhood. So when I was a kid, I was the short, skinny, smart kid with the funny name. So I had all the things. There was this kid in my neighborhood who he had an issue with me using big words, and I can't at this point I really can't remember whether I said tennis shoes and he wanted me to say sneakers, or I said sneakers and he wanted me to say tennis shoes, but those were the words in question.
Gotcha.
And whichever one I said pissed him off so much that he did a flying tackle, and I hit my head on the shelf with the bread, where the bread loaves, like supermarket shelves, little rounded metal edge, right? Had to get some stitches in the back of my head. And so after that, my mom and I decided to do some martial arts lessons.
Okay.
Our YMCA, the YMCA I was going to over where my school was, because I was bussed out to the nicer side of town. The YMCA offered, they called it judo and jujitsu. You know, that was the kids'
Gotcha.
class, and that's all I knew for years. Coming back to it years later, realized it was Danzan Ryu. The instructor who ran that class was one of Professor Randall's black belt students. You know, and he was in charge of the kids' class. The prof runs the adult class, but it was at my YMCA, and so I did it from 11 until I was 14, almost 15. And then I took a break because there were skateboards and video games and girls, and then started back when I was about 20.
Wow.
And then I've been going nonstop since.
Wow. And what, I guess even more importantly, what brought you back?
So yeah, that was there were parts of it I missed. There were several people involved in the community who were also YMCA camp people. So I'd grown up at the YMCA doing a lot of programming in Los Angeles. And in several of the programs that I did growing up, the main ones were YMCA camp. And so a lot of the YMCA camp people were also jujitsu people. And so there were several of them that I knew kind of just on a social basis, because we hung out and we did stuff.
Right.
And my friend Joe Ksenia, we used to do role-playing games at game night at his house on Fridays. And he was in class at that point, and he kept, I would occasionally swing by class and say hi to Joe and a few others that I knew from camp. And Randy would always ask, Randy Katz, now Professor Randy Katz, would always ask, like, when are you coming back? I'm like, oh, someday, eventually. And then Joe started asking, so when are you coming back? Oh, eventually. And one night he kind of pinned me down. He was like, I'm like, I don't even have a gi anymore. And he goes, really? And so he walks into his closet, he comes back out and hands me his old gi. He's like, I'll see you Tuesday. Yeah. So yeah. The gi fairy found me, and I was back in class. I was back on the mats that Tuesday night, and knew I would, at that point, there's that feeling like, all right, I'm back, and this is home.
Gotcha. That's wonderful, man. That's wonderful. So you've had a long
nonstop sense.
What is the difference, I guess, now, if you were to put, which is like an age-old adage, right? Pitting style against style, right? So if you get someone that's a proficient striker with someone that does your style at the same level, exact same level, what would the outcome be? Or are there too many variables there to calculate?
So here, the way it'll basically work out is that you've got until I'm elbow distance away from you to knock me out.
Right.
So if I'm close enough that I can touch you with my elbows, I'm about to throw you.
Gotcha.
And unless you've got a lot of practice in throwing, I am about to throw you. Right? Just like once, if at about that 4-foot range, you're about to kick me in the head.
Right.
Right. Like,
right. Is it
like you are about to kick me in the head?
Right.
I'm thinking I don't know if he's not quite close enough to hit me, and you're already like, my foot's in your face.
Right.
So I've seen you do it. Right. I'm like, no, he's way over there.
Right.
He's way, I don't have to, whoa,
Yeah.
So in that same way of, if I'm within 5 feet, I'm about to get kicked. Right now, the question is, can I avoid getting kicked long enough to get close enough,
gotcha.
Right, to enter what is then my prime zone. My prime zone is close range.
Right,
where it is hard to get your foot within a 2-foot
absolutely
space.
Absolutely.
Right. If our bodies are 2 feet away, it is hard, not impossible, not impossible, but it's hard to get your foot into that space to send me away. right? You know, you can stick some knees in there and do some elbows, but you know, at that point, you're not getting the good extensions that you want.
Right. So a lot of functionality requires you to be within the close range to basically be able to put your hands on the other person. If you can connect, you know, even if that's even missing, because I guess people don't. I guess the average person wouldn't realize that, you know, there are certain realms that we like to operate in based on what it is we do. For kickers, it's a certain distance, which is different than hands. And then, you know, boxers have a certain range too. You know, and there's a lot of distance management happening on both ends, right? Because you still have to connect in some way. There's that principle's there. But for you guys, it's really connecting the hands, being able to, I guess, smother the person, if you will. Is that right to say?
So there's a, yes, very much. So, but there's also, so we work from hand striking range and closer, right? Okay. So, there's still that idea of, you know, even when you're doing your like some free play and free sparring, you know, you'll stick that foot out there and then somebody will grab a hold of it. You're like, oh no, you can't grab a hold. It's like, well, yes, I can. That's exactly what I'm looking to do, is grab a hold of it. Right. And so, like, that's what I said, you've got until I get a little bit closer. That's how long you have to knock me out. Right. And or make it so that I am not stable, not rooted, not present. Right. Because otherwise that is where my training style excels, is at that range.
Gotcha.
And I've got an extremely diverse tool bag for that range.
That's cool. That's a great way to say it too, sir. I like that. Now that you've been at Sun Tzu, Asheville Sun Tzu, since about 2010, from what I read. So, what's the biggest difference, or what are the biggest differences that you notice between Japanese martial arts and Korean martial arts? Essentially, effectively the differences between Taekwondo, right, which is predominantly taught at that school, right, and then Jiu-Jitsu. What have you noticed in your time?
It's more about organization of curriculum than anything else.
Okay.
The Taekwondo is a predominantly rooted in a solo practice method, mm-hmm. right? And a methodology that can be practiced by a single practitioner.
Right.
And you can do about 65, 70% of your practice without another body present.
Right.
Our style is the exact opposite. I've got about 20, 25% of my practice I can do without a body, right? Like, I have to be able to put my hands on someone. And so then as a result of that, the size of a class that you can facilitate, the number of practitioners that can safely engage, the speed that those practitioners can engage at changes, right? A safe training speed when, you know, when you're about to almost break somebody's arm, the safe training speeds are slow.
Right.
Right. And when the only thing you have to worry about is making sure that your foot pivots the right way while you're kicking, you can go faster.
Absolutely.
Right. And so you get to do a different type of practice at a different pace, but that's inherent in the ways that those practices show up and the ways that the practitioners have to engage with them.
Right. With the instructional, I guess, value that you bring in to your art, when you conduct classes, what's your personal philosophy? Because I think as you learn a martial art, there's like a key voice in your head, I guess, at least at my end. There's like a key voice inside my head from like the very first people that ever taught me. And that kind of stays with you. And then I guess you sort of develop your own personal attachments or voices for the style, in a sense. So when you teach, it's got to be different, right? Because, you know, you're not teaching another you. You're teaching, you know, a room full of people who are vastly different than you are. and you also teach kids. So how do you safely teach throwing and falling effectively to children and adults?
Methodically.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah.
There are specific methods. There are, you have to, in order to be able to transmit that information, you have to be able to distill it for yourself into its essentials, right? And so there are some pieces that are essential. There are some pieces that are entirely secondary. Some essentials and then there are drills that will develop those and cultivate those skills. So I've got a set of drills that I teach, and they are incremental. They're incremental. Each one is an incremental increase in complexity or difficulty beyond the previous, but they are cumulative, so that you can't just jump to like step 5. You got to go from step 1 to step 2, and there's a seasoning period of time that is required for that as well. Right. Where even if you can physically perform the skill, there is a time that it takes your body to develop the resilience to receive that energy as well. So it is a method. It takes some time, and there are steps. But at this point I've been doing it long enough that every month I've got another story from some parent or kid who comes back to me saying, my kid was out doing insert activity here, fell down, and they didn't get hurt because of the time they spent in your class.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Class. So, and then the biggest thing about I do not teach people to throw until after I've taught them to fall.
Right.
And I've talked to some instructors like, well, you got to give them something that's exciting and flavorful. I'm like, yeah, yes and no.
Right.
Like, we can put a lot of flavor and excitement in other places, but it's a thing I do not compromise on until they can fall safely. We don't do any throwing at all.
Gotcha.
And it takes a while, and that's okay. My experience has been that I can teach you more jujitsu faster over the long run if I teach you much slower at the beginning and focus on the rolling and falling skills. Right. Like the amount of time I spend on that in my class is between 40 to 50% of the total class time is spent only on rolls and falls.
Wow.
And it seems disproportionately large to some people who do roll and fall it. But I always point to my students who've been in for about 5 years. And in every case, my 5-year student has learned more curriculum than their student at 5 years because they can fall. And because we never have to wait for their fall to be good enough to do the difficult skills.
Gotcha. So what are the elements of if you were to just break it down for us real quick and give us like a little tidbit, how do you fall safely? How do you fall? I see it happen all the time. I watched somebody get ripped yesterday. They fell
shoulder
on the block. Shoulder. Okay.
So it's about bone alignment first.
Okay.
So all martial arts practice is about bone alignment.
Right.
Always.
Right.
All correct technique is about bone alignment.
Right.
So in the case of falling, in landing, my landing position is I want to have 2 shoulders on the ground, 1 calf, no butt.
Gotcha.
So my shoulders are down, my calf is down, my butt does not touch. As a result of that, my shoulder, my hip, and my knee are going to be in a straight line. Right, so I'm going to be on the ground in that position.
Gotcha.
Where this is my door's the ground, right? But because, and I'm going to be in that position because when my spine and body are straight, my core is engaged and I have structure.
Uh-huh. Gotcha.
I see a lot of people fall on this kind of shrimped up sideways curl thing. Yeah. And what that ends up doing is it takes the pelvis and it rotates it all the way vertical so that you're landing on the head of the femur, right? And so the thigh, right. They're laying on the side of their thigh. And if you're laying on the side of your thigh, you're taking the ball of the femur and slamming it into the hip socket with every landing.
Ouch.
Landing the way that I do, with the two shoulders, one calf, and then the ball of the other foot on the ground, so the knee is up. The pelvis rests at about a 45-degree angle so that you're on the glute. If you're touching anything, but you should not touch anything. And you don't want to touch anything because you want your shoulders on the ground, you want your calf on the ground, and you want your hips, your pelvis, your lumbar spine, your tailbone. You want all that off of the ground. And if all of that is off the ground, your body makes an arch. And an arch, the reason we use them in bridges is because an arch takes energy from the middle where your pelvis is and your kidneys and your floating ribs, the insertion of the diaphragm on the back side is at the floating ribs and kidneys, takes all of that and makes sure it doesn't receive energy at all. And any energy that is received is sent out the ends through the calf, right, which is bone wrapped in muscle,
right,
and across the broad shoulders, which you need to make sure that your arms are down, not up.
Right.
When down, the scapula rotate flat and then reside in several layers of muscle, bone plates, more muscle.
Gotcha.
And you want two shoulders on the ground for more surface area. Ah. If you only have one shoulder on the ground, your upper body you've got half of your upper body on the ground, right? But if I can get this shoulder to touch, I can increase my upper body surface area by almost 50%.
Wow. Makes a big difference.
And a 50% increase in surface area cuts the force received in by 2/3. Yeah. The next idea is one of timing of the fall. I fall in pieces, not as one sound. I originally teach my students to fall with one sound at the beginning because you got to learn where you are with respect to the air and the ground. Mm-hmm. But once you know that, then you fall in pieces. You slap first, then your body comes down. So you slap, then your calf, then your toe. So the legs come out in pieces and the slap goes down first, so that the amount of time it takes for your body to come to rest is extended. Mm. And in physics, there's a concept called impulse. And impulse is force over time.
Right.
And impulse is also equal to a change in momentum. So you can change momentum with a large force in a short time, or you can change your momentum with a small force over a large time, right? Like your car can go from 60 to 0 in nothing, right, with a really large force,
right? Or
or you can slow down on your brake and come to a coast over a long,
preferable, right?
several seconds. Yeah. One of those experiences is much more pleasant for your body.
For sure.
Right, and so so that falling method has several things that are contrary to what I was originally taught about how to fall and the reasons for those things, right? I was taught to stay on your side more, slap, fall all in one piece. And like I said, I had a chance to train with Professor Bob Hudson and some of his students, in particular, Eric Atienza. Eric and I are about the same height, so we kind of naturally paired up during classes. And that dude, man, I've been chasing his fall for 20 years.
Wow.
And I get to have discussions with people who are like, oh, well, you can't slap on concrete. I'm like, oh, you better slap on concrete.
Right.
You're like, that's when you need to slap. And they're like, but it's going to sting. I'm like, yes, it's going to sting, and it still feels better than a broken rib. So take the slap. right? And Eric would practice his falls. He's in the Navy. He would practice his falls on the deck of the destroyer at sea. So if you think concrete is hard, try armored steel. You know.
Wow.
And
that's real.
So Eric is the one who's like, oh no, you have to slap. Now he doesn't slap with a flat hand; he slap with a hammer fist or a knife hand. But the slapping action is essential for the slowdown process and for the regain of structure as your body settles.
Gotcha.
There's also this idea that you're only falling as long as you're in the air, not touching the ground. And as soon as any part of your body is touching the ground, the falling is done. It's now time to settle, right? And until your front foot leaves the ground, your fall hasn't started, you're technically still standing. So when being thrown, you'll see, if you see video of like myself or my students being thrown, you'll see the front foot stays on the ground a really long time. You're almost completely upside down before that foot comes off the ground. Yes. So I get to share the momentum that's being put into my body. The momentum that's being put into my body by the throw. I get to share that with the earth like a heat sink. So I only take a part of it because I was in the air for all of it, right? When I'm in the air, then they get to put that energy directly into my body. And I have to take it. Right. If I've got a foot on the ground while being thrown, then I get to share that out. And then I slap quickly so that, again, I start slowing down as soon as that slap touches the ground, which is why I want it to touch fast and long before my body gets there. So the slowdown process has already begun before my body comes anywhere near the ground. Doing that allows your body's center of gravity to no longer reside within your physical structure. Your body's center of gravity will kind of float out in front of you for a little bit during that process. And you can do some really funny things with momentum when the center of mass for the object doesn't reside within its physical body. This is how Olympic high jumpers jump over the bar, right? Their center of gravity never goes over the bar, but they do that whole backwards flop thing. Their center of gravity goes under the bar the whole time, right? But they will incrementally send a piece of their physical body over the bar, even as their center of mass remains under the bar.
Right. It makes sense. Holy cow. So your understanding of physics, right? Studying it for however many years you did at the University of, am I saying it right, Hilo, or is it a different way?
Sorry, you broke up there for a second.
I'm sorry. Is it the University of Hilo or Hilo? Am I saying it wrong?
Hilo.
University
of Hawaii.
In Hilo, which is really cool that you got to study.
Hilo, Hawaii is the second largest city in the state.
Okay.
Yeah, Hilo is the second largest city in the state, which it's actually a little small town. I moved there from LA, so it was like a little small town stuck in the 80s, which was awesome. It rains. Oh my God, so much.
Yeah.
much rain.
Yeah.
The first year I moved there, we got 180 inches of rainfall that year, and that was a drought.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of rain. What do you bring from the physics world?
Yeah, it rained so hard that.
Did the physics world that you were involved in there, did that help sort of accelerate your understanding of your style and what you're doing? Did it help you, like, sort of, not like almost add on to what the teacher was teaching you, so to speak?
Well, yes, there was a point, in my senior year, I hadn't really even done a methodology understanding of, like, why does this thing work? But one of my students was there, and he comes to me one day, and we sit down with, like, the dry erase board. He's like, all right, so why does it work? Because I know it does work, right? Like, we've got the empirical evidence, right? Like, throw me and my body does this thing and it works. And it works better than the other things that I've been taught. But why? And so we sat there and we started trying to figure out, I was like, well, what happens if your body does this, in this configuration? Like, where is your center? Like, oh, center of mass is over there. Huh, that's interesting, right? And then, the realization that, like, when the slap happens, that Like your body actually rotates around the first point of contact. And in doing that, it sheds some of its momentum because some of it is perpendicular to the direction of motion. So like the hand touches and like, oh, look, that, this angle provides this proportion of the total body's momentum is completely negated in that just because it touched first.
Right.
Even if it doesn't generate any force, and then the shoulder touches and it does this thing again. And so we did this whole breakdown, at least to understand conceptually why this mechanic accomplishes what it accomplishes. Right. Even if I couldn't necessarily put any final numbers on it, like I could understand the methodology of why it is that this thing does what it's. So my, between the physics and then the body work training is all about understanding human anatomy. So if where physics and human anatomy meet is the martial arts.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, great observation there. Another thing I wanted to ask you, kind of set, I guess, not sort of connected to martial arts in a way, but more about identity as a Black martial artist, right? Which is what you are, what I am. What does that mean to you, especially with kind of everything that's been that transpired last year going into this year? I've been thinking personally more about, sort of our responsibilities as martial artists. And I've gotten so many students over the years that have talked to me, and especially now as a father, you as well, where it's like, you understand sort of a perspective that a parent's like, hey, I have someone that looks like you, and and you're a positive, example or representation for that person. And now that we respectively have our own children, I feel like there's even more responsibility added on top of not just being a martial artist, but of course being a positive Black role model. Can you speak to any of that on your end, if you identify that way, and what that means to you having your own family now?
No, it is a complex space to inhabit. But for me, the most important part has always been to do my best to be an excellent person first. And the fact that I happen to be Black carries a responsibility to offset a lot of the foolishness that I feel a responsibility to be a counterbalance to some of the bullheadedness that you see going on around. In my martial arts practice and in the ways that I engage with teaching, really is just about being an example of what you can be without the BS. Right. So I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, where Inglewood and LA meet on Crenshaw Boulevard, 67th Street. Right down the street from where we're kind of the border of LA and Inglewood. So in the heart of Rolling 60s Crip territory.
Yeah, that's rough.
But not too far away from where the Bloods were. So we were kind of almost on the border of all of that. But even there, my mom was insistent that that life wasn't going to be a part of our life. So I just got to make sure I hold that line no matter what. This last year has been weird because there have definitely been some cases where the continuation of injustice has been apparent and prevalent. There have also been some cases that have come out where I look at it and I go, nope, that was him, if you forgive my French, dumbassing himself to death.
Right.
Like I saw one, there's a video of one where the guy, like 3 or 4 cops shot him, but he walked through the cops around his car as they were continually to tell him to stop, right? Because he'd been in an altercation with someone else.
Yeah.
And when you look at the video, his body language says, "Oh, I'm gonna show you," right? Like that's all the body language says, like, "I'm coming to get you." And he walks around his car and opens the door and reaches inside, and they shot him. Yeah. And someone was complaining like, "Oh, another black man shot." Like, no. Like in that moment, I'll tell you right now, I would have shot him, right? And I'm not saying that I would have shot him if I were the police who were there. I'm telling you that me, with my 30 plus years of training in a close-in joint locking and throwing martial art, I would have shot him.
Right.
Right, because he had a good 30 seconds to stop. Because he was asked multiple times to stop. There was like, the hands and he pushed his way through them to reach into his car, not to get into his car, to reach into his car.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the other side of that is that, as a black man and as a martial artist and an instructor, we also have to have a real conversation about, don't be so busy thumping your chest about what your rights are,
right,
that you dumbass yourself to death.
Yeah.
Right, because that one.
That's real.
That's real, and that's on him. He had several opportunities to take action on his own behalf to come up with a different outcome.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's definitely a real.
And he chose not to.
It's a real conversation. Why do you think there's so few of us? I guess out there. I mean, I don't remember many growing up. And I got started later. I got started probably 10 years.
There are communities.
Yeah.
Right. But there are strong enclaves of communities in various places. So
yeah.
On the East Coast, there's the Snukus Ryu crew under Dr. Moses Powell. Back where I was in Southern California, the BKF, the Black Karate Federation.
Yes. Yeah.
I knew Grandmaster Robert Temple out there back when I was coming up in my Danzan Ryu time.
Right.
I had an opportunity to work out with him several times. So there are communities, but it's not a large and widespread one for sure.
Yeah.
But in much the same way that there's not a large widespread community of, or I should say, there's not a popular widespread community of college educated Black people either.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of that is owing to some of the culture and the things that are glorified and emphasized within our culture.
Right.
So, like for me personally, because of where I grew up and the stuff I saw growing up, I don't listen to most hip hop right now, because most of it tends to glorify all of the stuff that was the worst of where we grew up.
Right.
And like the cultural norms that go with that and the thought processes that go with that are the things that are preventing people from being excellent and wanting to excel in anything other than sports or being a player.
Right.
Like those are the primary paths out that are emphasized or glorified and given any spotlight. Most, we don't put a lot of time, energy, or spotlight on the people who got out by using their brains, or the people who got out by holding to ethical standard.
Right. So I guess the pressure's on us, I guess, to continue to promote, the art is, and I guess that's one of my last question to you is, given that that's sort of our history, not all of our history, it's not all relegated to that, but because there is obviously excellence within our community, but I feel like, at least for me, it's a way to, just like you said, I want to touch on that. It's just a way to counteract sort of what is sort of the popular thing going around for us, is by continuing to walk down sort of this path and doing the martial arts and just literally improving as much as I can, spending time with myself, improving the mindset, talking to people, doing things like this where I get to speak with you and take these opportunities to sort of share, not just martial arts knowledge, but perspective as well, right? The two different eyes that see, one eye sees this, one eye sees this. Oh, well, I didn't think about this before. I didn't hear this before. So I feel like that's sort of a constant within the martial arts community that we have, is that, there's so many styles, but then even within the same style, you have so many different perspectives. So I guess is it more of a job for you, or is it more of a responsibility for you at this point in the stage in the game, so many years in, to continue promoting the art to as many people as you can?
The Japanese word sensei,
yes,
does not mean teacher.
Right.
It means one who goes before.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the goal for me is just to keep going.
Right.
And I've got a trail.
Right. Gotcha.
And leave a trail behind. Knowing that it is easier to follow in someone's wake than it is to blaze the trail. So if there are some trails that I'm following, but they're not exactly the same one that I'm on. So I'm kind of hybrid of following some trails that others have blazed before, and then blazing my own as along the way too.
Right.
But really, it's a commitment to find where is both my growth, but also what I can do and leave for my children.
Absolutely.
And then, by extension, anyone else that I happen to be in proximity with, because if we're crabs in a bucket, we keep pulling each other down. Mm-hmm. Or we can all join hands, and have you seen that I don't even know what I think it was like some Chinese army special forces thing, right? And they've got 20 guys going over a 15-foot wall. Yeah. And the speed that they got, everybody over the wall was ridiculous, because everybody, one, knew his job, and two, was committed to getting everybody else over that wall super quick, right? And at the end, you've got 10 guys just linking arms and walking up the wall, while the rest pull, the counterweight of the other guys are literally pulling the last guys up the wall, right? And everybody gets to go.
Right.
So if we can be more of that and less crabs in a bucket, then the saying is a rising tide lifts all the ships. Either that, or the other one that always hits for me is steel sharpens steel, or iron sharpens iron. Mm-hmm. So if you want to stay sharp, you got to be around people who want to be sharp. Right.
Right. Absolutely.
And it doesn't matter so much what they're going to be sharp in, because there's a mindset that goes with being sharp.
Absolutely.
Right. And that mindset, one of the biggest things I've learned from Master Morris is about how to find ways to apply. If you're excellent in this one area, it's why do you accept not being excellent in other areas? right? You know, it creates a dissonance. There's a break in harmony when you're excellent in one place and then meh other places. So you got to up your game, right?
I got you.
But that's at the end is not supposed to be the point of the practice, right? Like the practice is supposed to be about not just the physical thing, but what it does, how it shapes you, who it shapes you into, right? And then, you know, because if you've shaped into that person, great, then be that person everywhere.
Right. It's very important. Very important point. It's very important. Very important point there. Absolutely important at that. Sir, this has been a wonderful interview. I know you have to go. I know time is short for you, so I want to cut it and make sure that you have time to get back to your responsibilities. But I really appreciate having you on. I wish the conversation. I have more questions for you, but I was like, maybe I'm gonna have you on again in the future, hopefully, and we get to ask those questions. Maybe next time in person at that. But I really want to thank you for your time, and I know you're today, so thank you so much, guys. This has been the podcast number 8 with Professor Thabiti Sabahive. Thank you, sir. Guys, make sure you follow, subscribe, like this video so we can keep bringing more awesome content to you and martial arts to you wherever you are in the world. Thank you, sir. And for everybody out there, take care.
Bye.
Bye now.